My name is Paul Emiljanowicz. I am the Managing Director of Participedia. Thank you for attending this iteration of our Teaching Cafe series. Before I formally introduce our speakers, I would like to begin with a moment of grounding through what we call at Participedia our Global Community Land Acknowledgement. So I'd like to share my screen for a moment. Although a digital database and global community, Participedia is grounded at McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, what is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga nations. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement describes the dish to represent the territory and one spoon to symbolize the peoples living on and sharing the resources of the land, only taking what we need and keeping the dish clean. We recognize the ongoing effects of colonial processes of erasure, marginalization, and extraction, of which we are intimately a part of, and we encourage all Participedia members and those joining us today to reflect solidaristically on the Indigenous sovereignties, colonial legacies, and life relations on the land in which you are residing or find yourself on in this moment, and of course to find ways to support Indigenous communities and better life relations. Now into a more formal introduction, the topic before us, our governance models, our vocabularies. They indeed remain indebted to perspectives, debates, violent exclusions, and Eurocentric theories that emerged first to make sense of the challenges that imperial and hierarchical centers faced in ruling over their own populations and those at the colonial margins that they had created. And secondly, to then universalize that rule through transplanted governance logics, universalized and normalized through state violence. In the past, these have been more overt: colonization, indentureship, civilization, indirect rule, structural adjustment programs, big men theory, or more recent, it is masked nefariously in human rights interventions, good governance indicators, sustainability, or even sometimes democracy itself. Yet despite this, peoples and communities around the world draw attention to the tensions of universalizing governance vocabularies and continue to mobilize and deploy governance differently. How do we learn from them, from each other, from the archives and databases and knowledge-producing spaces? Where do we go from here? And bringing these important issues to focus and proposing one such path forward is Sebastián Calderón, Melisa Ross, Eveline Rodrigues, and Lex Paulson, who will be speaking and sharing with us their attempt to contribute to pluralizing governance vocabularies through the Global Governance Vocabulary Initiative and the Rabat Declaration, an important output out of the GVI. It is our absolute pleasure to be hosting this conversation, and thanks to each and every one of you for taking the time to join us and to participate today. I'll now formally pass it off to Sebastián. Thanks again.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastián Calderón from Colombia. And I want to thank you also for joining us today. I know for some of you, it might be really early. So thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm glad here to discuss this exciting collaborative project that is reshaping global governance, the Governance Vocabularies Initiative. This initiative is a partnership between Innovation for Policy Foundation, I4Policy, the School of Collective Intelligence, and Participedia. And happy also to be presenting today alongside with my colleagues Melisa, Eveline, and Lex, the whole initiative. Just to add for the context and the introduction that Paul just gave us, I think a good point to start also recognizing and like trying to start with the project was the recognition that we're facing a crisis in global democracy. Democracy is declining in many places. Major threats to democracy have been addressed in many indexes and many information that says that, for example, in terms of improvements and declines, the year of 2022 was the 6th consecutive year in which more countries experienced declines in democratic processes than improvements. This is the Global State of Democracy report. Declines in freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association was present in all the regions in 2022. And if we look at 2023, things don't look much different. More and more people are doubting and not trusting democratic systems. And this is making people lose confidence on public participation, on public decision-making, and on public means. We're facing in different parts of the world the rise of populist movements, the rise of authoritarianism, and among other threats. And surely to kind of solve this problem and to tend to solve this crisis, we usually say like that we need to strengthen democracy. But what happens if it's not just about this, but about looking at the problem and providing solutions from another point of view? If we take a step back and see the whole picture, we're essentially facing a crisis in governance. We're struggling with how we collectively decide things. We have been simplifying the different elements of governance to a narrower perspective, neglecting access to collective human wisdom on collaborative action and collective decision-making. We've been limiting our thoughts to governance models, mostly just considering democracy. And we need to recognize that not the reality of many places are now really democratic. Like there's a lot of other models and a lot of authoritarianism growing on different parts of the world. But even so, we collapse the idea of democracy only to electoral representation, centering the importance of democracy only in the idea of electoral representation. So with the Governance Vocabularies Initiative, with this group of people, we found the opportunity to talk about the importance of the importance of participatory collaborative governance in terms of accessibility and representation, and the importance of working towards reimagining new governance models. We acknowledge that there are missing pieces in decision-making in a global level. And there are missing pieces also on how do we address hegemonic discourses and governance models that have structure or that are being structuring policies and development plans around the world. There is a concentration, a regional concentration in terms of governance processes. And by concentration, we mean that decision-making processes, knowledge production, and financing even of social and development projects are concentrated mostly in what we call the global north, or predominantly European countries and the United States. The result of this concentration is mainly the enclosure first in addressing challenges and opportunities related to governance, but second, the lack of collaboration and recognition of governance models developed in different parts of the world. This results in a failure to acknowledge sustainable processes in the global south that are making great efforts in terms of innovation, governance, and democracy in various ways. But more importantly, we need to create more and more pathways and more channels of collaboration between South and South, or what we call the global South, in the exchange of these works, of these initiatives or these projects regarding innovation, governance, or democracy. We need a new global policy paradigm. We know that there are a lot of threats with international development plans, as we might call it, as for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG 2030, there's a lot of threats that we need to address. And as the group, as the GVI, the Governance Vocabularies Initiative, started working, we recognized that the crisis of governance requires new understandings of models beyond the idea of democracy. This is mainly a question on how political problems, how social problems, how cultural problems are faced without maybe considering other frameworks rather than only democracy. In this issue, we recognize that vocabularies have fundamental importance, and that those vocabularies are the ones that are describing our contexts and are describing the ways in which we organize ourselves. And that's the reason why I want to pass it now to my colleague Eveline to explain more about the project. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastián. Hi, everyone. My name is Eveline Rodrigues. I'm a lawyer, been working on constitutional law issues and rule of law issues, especially on the African continent. And I've been working with the Innovation for Policy Foundation on multiple projects since 2019. I would like to just take us back to the origins of the project and when we actually started thinking about this initiative. It was actually November 2022. This is when the Innovation for Policy Foundation, after having worked on the continent, on the African continent for many years, on developing different methodologies for public participation in public policy specifically. The foundation realized that a lot of the terminologies or the vocabularies that the foundation was using were not the same vocabularies that other organizations were using to actually describe the same type of realities. And in this effort of trying to spread knowledge around our public policy, public participation, we realized that there was a need for organizations to talk to each other more in terms of how to design good governance models. But at the same time, we did not want to go for a singular approach or a universal approach of framing like vocabularies, because we were well aware of the colonial nature of the universal discourse. And so we really wanted to have a project that could balance that, the need for more dialogue between communities, between academics, between different spaces in governance, and at the same time recognizing the different models that exist in different countries, the different governance practices that have been developed in different communities, and especially in the Global South. We talked earlier about the hegemonic narrative around governance, often being framed by academics from the Global North. And the goal of the initiative was also to contribute to decolonizing governance in general through vocabularies, being conscious that vocabularies that we use carry certain narratives. And we really wanted to be able to have a pluriversal approach when it comes to governance. And that's how we brought on board different organizations like Participedia, the School of Collective Intelligence, Demo Reset, and this was early 2023. We decided to have our first gathering, bringing together academics, practitioners, activists, communities, and we had this first gathering in Morocco. We were hosted by the School of Collective Intelligence. This was in September, from 15 to 17 September this year. And it was a really great opportunity and amazing time where we actually brought people from different locations, from different geographies, from Latin America, from Africa, from Europe, and to actually think about what could be this initiative. And some of the outcomes of this conference was so three things. The first idea that we had with this initiative that came up from the Governance Vocabularies Conference was to develop an API, like a metadata base, where we will be able to combine different databases that collects cases of deliberative democracy across the globe. And we decided to start with two databases, the Participedia database and Latino database. And these two databases combine cases, especially from the Global South, on deliberative democracy. We also thought about designing a handbook that would sustain this idea of pluriversality. So basically the handbook would be a tool to navigate across different plural repositories, different practices, different theories, and document different methods and cases from around the globe. And then finally, one of the good outcome of the conference was the Rabat Declaration. So we came together and had this declaration that we will be sharing with you guys. And the idea of this declaration was also to set the vision of the initiative. It's a work in progress. We would like to have more voices recognized into the declaration, and we would like to have organizations and different people come together and review that declaration. But basically, the declaration was a way for us to actually set the vision of the whole initiative, and also recognize the importance of including different languages coming from different spaces and countries, different concepts into the work that we're doing. We are, maybe later we'll be talking about it, but we will be publishing the Rabat Declaration on a platform that will allow everyone to come and contribute to it. I'm done on my side. So maybe I'll pass on to Melisa, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, thanks, Eveline. Thanks a lot for sharing the backstory to the initiative. I'll take up what you were just sharing towards the end of your introduction and the outputs, so the concrete kind of products that we were hoping to share with the audience today and keep working on in the upcoming months. I'll share my screen for a little bit, and hopefully you're all seeing it. So going back to what Seba and Eveline were sharing before, right? We know that communities across the world are constantly working, experimenting, developing different processes, methods, forms of collectively governing their own communities, of collectively inputting into politics, kind of drawing and drafting political pathways for those communities, for nations, and at the international level as well. And many of these experiments are already captured in a number of databases, of repositories, of websites that some of you may be familiar with. I just put the ones that I could fit in my improvised slide in there, but there's probably other repositories out there that we don't know of. And so there's many experiences, there's many cases of participatory governance, of deliberative democracy, of democratic innovation, as we want to call them, are happening across the world. They're creating multiplicities of methods that, and some of them are documented, some of them are not, but most of the documentation that we know of and we're aware of is still very focused on models that come from the global north towards the south, to some extent to models that have started in the south, but then are exported to the global north, that being the case of participatory budgeting, for instance. And while we have some of that diversity reflected in many of these databases, we also have a lot of evidence of what standardization does to these initiatives and to their creative power and to their capacity to even achieve social justice. Then again, thinking of participatory budgeting and how its dissemination across the world has also led to emptying its reformatory power. So what we are trying to understand as part of the Governance Vocabularies Initiative is how can we better map, how can we better understand what's happening across the world in terms of participatory governance, how can we better share the knowledge that we have across those experiences, and how can we also create more representative repositories that show what's happening well beyond this axis of global north, global south. So what we want to do is definitely pluralize the vocabularies that we use to talk about these cases. We also want to pluralize the forms of knowledge that we have about these cases and these experiences. And we want to create efficient and accessible ways of learning across these experiences, right? And so to do that, one of the first outputs that the Governance Vocabularies Initiative is working on is an MVP, a minimum viable product, so an experimentation on how to combine some of these repositories. Many of you probably are already familiar with Participedia. Some of you might be familiar with Latino. Latino is a database of democratic innovations in Latin America. Participedia is a database of participatory processes, methods, and organizations across the world. These are the two largest databases of this space that we know of. So when I say this space, I mean democratic innovations, participatory governance, deliberative democracy, and related things to those. These are the two largest databases, but there's also an already existing collaboration between those two databases, right? There's a Latino collection at Participedia. So we thought this is a good place to start thinking about how to create interoperability between those repositories. So the idea is to understand how the knowledge from one database and the other can be combined, can be shared, can update each other, right? Because the problem with many of these repositories is that they're initiated as part of specific projects that have a starting date, an end date, they have limited budget. If they're research projects, as many of these databases are, then they have to answer very specific research questions, produce very specific research outputs, but then the knowledge that they put out there sometimes kind of stays frozen in time, right? It's not updated. What happens with the cases that are registered in one or the other and are not updated later? What happens with duplicated knowledge, duplicated information about cases that is repeated across these databases, then where they could feed each other and they could update each other. So trying to answer those questions is part of the development of this specific component. As Eveline was mentioning, there's more components, more projects and products that we want to create as part of this initiative. So the database of databases is one of them, but if we think of databases of cases of collective governance as maps, so to say, then we also need compasses to navigate those maps. So as part of the initiative, we also started documenting many toolboxes that are out there in terms of what and how to implement participatory processes. So what are the resources that we have, the handbooks, the toolkits, the information that is out there. A third output, as Eveline was mentioning, would be a thesaurus, a sort of encyclopedia of pluriversal vocabularies of governance. But going back to the this MVP, this test on how to create interoperability across platforms, we thought we didn't only want to share what we've been working on, but we also want to hear from you. We want to know, in your experience as researchers, as users of databases, maybe as practitioners as well, what is missing from the information that is out there already about participatory governance, about collective governance, about democratic innovations? What functions are you missing? What kind of data do you still need? What do you think needs to be better combined in those existing databases? What kind of information needs to be standardized? What variables do you usually work with, which are missing? And also, to what extent do you think that there can be interoperability between these databases, and what kind of specific cases, questions, and experiences actually cannot or should not be combined with others? So these are some questions for our conversation later. I'll stop sharing screen and I'll paste the questions in the chat. But before we move forward, Seba, I don't know if we want to have that conversation now or we want to move to presenting the Rabat Declaration and then have like larger conversation about everything. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of time, I think we're good. But I think it will be like great if we can have like a larger conversation at the final part. I think mixing maybe elements could help us also in the initiative. So I guess we're passing it to Evie and to Lex. Thanks, guys.
Great. So as I was saying, during the conference, we came up with a declaration, and we will be sharing in the chat the link to the declaration so that you can have it and you can also contribute to it if you would like to. Maybe I'd like to pass on to Lex to tell us maybe a little bit more about how we came up with the declaration during the conference. It's okay with you, Lex?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I should just say a couple words about the declaration. This is Lex, and greetings from Marrakesh, a rather boisterous airport afternoon on Friday. I was very happy on behalf of the school to be able to welcome a range of our colleagues, academics, practitioners, students, activists to Rabat in September. And one of the ideas that came from our discussions was that to the greatest possible extent in this Vocabularies Initiative, our means should be coherent with our ends, in that if we think that one of the problems is the conversation about governance being trapped in terms that are based in English, Anglo-Saxon, or French, or Spanish history, we should be beginning to integrate as much and as often as we can words and concepts that come from different cultures outside of the European and North American experience. And so I'm going to read just a portion of the Rabat Declaration, as you'll see, is not terribly long. We wanted to make this, on the one hand, a rallying point for those who believe, as we do, that the language of governance needs to evolve. If our institutions are going to evolve, how we talk about governance must evolve. And also make it a living document that can be commented and added to and enriched over time. We initially, as I said, initiated this document both as a declaration of belief and also as a North Star for our actions. So you'll see what you'll see in these belief statements, we believe statements, one part of the work that ended in a series of statements about what we seek. But for the purposes of today, I think focusing on these questions of belief and challenging them and having your questions about them and would be probably the most interesting. And so I'm going to read a little bit of the declaration and then talk about some of these words, non-English words that that our students and colleagues proposed to add in to enrich this document. So we believe that the challenges of the century demand new, dynamic, and fair models of governance. We believe that the complexity of these problems require our agiocepo, the participation of many and diverse citizens, not just a privileged few. We believe that there is no one best model of shura, and that useful nunya can come from all places and cultures. We believe that the vocabulary and language used in governance have an essential and often hidden impact on processes and institutions. We believe that the languages and knowledge systems of the Global South have too often been suppressed or ignored in the discourse of governance, both in these countries and globally. We believe that better models of governance will use language and concepts that resonate with local realities and knowledge systems. And we believe that we can support one another across borders of all kinds in reinventing the language of governance, working towards plurality, accountability, and responsibility around the globe. We believe that words create worlds of possibility. They define the contours of what is possible. So this is the declaration, and I want to say how these non-English words were brought in. It was in, again, a kind of a spontaneous flow of meaning within our discussions about concepts and how different concepts emerged from local realities. So just to use an example, the word agiocepo is a Yoruba word from the Yoruba people of Nigeria. And I'm going to read verbatim from Deborah, one of our participants in the conference, how she described it to us. Agiocepo is a Yoruba word describing the coming together of people to achieve a purpose. To put it differently, it's the accomplishment of a thing with the help of people. The idea behind the choice of word comes from the celebration style of the Yoruba people. Usually everyone buys the cloth chosen by the celebrant, so everyone looks uniform. Also, everyone participates in whatever form, no matter how little or young. It's the experience of this celebration that is captured in the word. So you see in this word adjoshepo something that approaches what we call collective intelligence or collaboration, but has this additional rich element and cultural context of a celebration, of contributing to a common way of appearing and celebrating, as opposed to merely working on a task together. And so this term adjoshepo, I think, is a nice example of how we can enrich ideas of governance by incorporating terms outside of European languages. So with that, I'll stop there and pass it back to Sebastián for the next part.
All right, thank you, Lex. We just shared the Rabat Declaration, the link, if you haven't saw it. We just shared it in the Zoom chat. And it's, as we might mention also, this is hosted, the Rabat Declaration is hosted in the Citizen Engagement Platform. And it's we're happy for you to jump in, to go there, to see what comments do you have. If you want to subscribe the declaration. Also, if you want to suggest changes, you can suggest them directly in the platform. So yeah, we really encourage you to jump in and to go there and comment the Rabat Declaration. So we have now time for opening questions. We want to open the space for you to have a conversation with you guys on what Melisa presented. For example, the questions. I don't know, Mel, if you want to put them again in the chat, please. Because we want to know also a lot of information. We want to invite you also to the Governance Vocabularies Initiative. This is not a closed initiative, or it's not an initiative only of Paul, Eveline, Melisa, Lex, John, and I. We're inviting here in the whole event people to join us and to keep working towards the MVP that Melisa presented and the Rabat Declaration, and how can we create like a pluriversal concept of governance from what Lex also presented. So yeah, I want to open the mic maybe and leave the floor for a couple of questions. Yes, Rosa. Welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you. Muchísimas gracias. I'd like to start by just saying thank you and appreciations for the work that you've been doing. It's deeply moving and inspiring. I love the concept of words from different languages that have concepts that we don't have in another language. Español es mi idioma materno, Spanish is my mother tongue, and we have a word that I have not yet found in English, which is fine because it doesn't exist in English, which is convivencia y convivir. And that means to share life together in a deeply meaningful way. And that's an aspect of these democratic innovations that I am very drawn to and that I've been doing some research on. So I think that with that, I'll stop there and you know, I don't want to take up too much space, but I just again want to say thank you for the work you've been doing.
All right, Rosa, thank you so much. And sure, if you want to join us also to keep working and thinking about this, it will be like super welcome and great for us to have also this type of like needs of expanding knowledge. And also my mother tongue is in Spanish, so there's, I guess, a lot of words that we need to explore and a lot of concepts that we still need to explore. Does anyone else want to jump in?
There is an interesting question in the chat regarding the terminology, whether it is potentially exclusionary or not. But I would also love to to throw a very direct question. I know I'm kind of part of the initiative, but in terms of you here today, how are you defining or thinking through governance base level? I know we're reversalizing, we're throwing open the door, but it seems to be almost an elephant in the room, right? We're working on governance. We seem to have a functioning kind of definition of governance in the back of our minds. We know in the academic literature is going to the 70s, 80s, tense discussions on the nature of governance, revived again early 2000s, again in the 2010s. So I just wonder, like, what is kind of how you view governance, this fine balancing act oftentimes portrayed between the market, the state, the citizens, and so on. Just interested in that dynamic, how you define governance, at least at this point, or a definition you're working towards.
Any of my colleagues want to jump in for the answer? Well, I'll just maybe jump in really quickly, and maybe if colleagues want to add something, that'll be welcome. I think governance at this moment, and as I also said in the introduction, we need different policy and governance models to be recognized, right? Governance is essentially the ways in which we organize ourselves, in which we take decisions together. And we know that there's a recognition on some models of governance. As I told you, the SDGs, for example, it's a way of framing the whole discussion of international goals. It's essentially a way of framing governance and trying to develop processes, participatory public policy making processes in the countries. So when we recognize that, when we say like, okay, there's a need of developing some of the maybe principles, guidelines, or even governance models throughout the world, since we're facing also global problems all over the globe. So it's kind of thinking, what are those elements and what are those governance models developed in societies that we haven't even recognized before? And we're talking about like migration, for example, migrants. How do they organize themselves, for example? We're talking about different countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, in Latin America, indigenous communities such as Mingas, for example, in Latin America. How do they organize, and how does those elements can bring can bring other elements into the discussion of the crisis on global democracy. I'll leave it there. I know that Lex and also Mel can build on this, and then I can give we can go with Bate. Sorry if I am not pronouncing it good, and with Chad. Let's go first with Lex and Mel, maybe on supporting the question, and then we can go with you, Bate.
Hi, Mel, would you like to go?
No, you can go.
Okay, so like Seb, I think that looking at the genealogy of words is often really helpful, especially when it allows us to get away from abstraction and back to basic needs as living things on the planet. And in the last few years, I've really enjoyed reading books from historians like James Scott, who talks about the early history of sedentary civilization and where a lot of our ideas of governance come from in the first settled civilizations of Mesopotamia in the 5th and 4th millenniums BC, and you get a sense that the problems that we see in governance are on the one hand tied to our most basic needs to feed and protect ourselves and transmit what we think is important to our children, and those are problems that have gone back for hundreds of thousands of years. And what makes us different in that sense from other social species like wolves or dolphins that live together but don't solve problems in the same way and don't have the ability to, through language, to create the level of collaboration that human beings can create. for better or worse. And then on the other hand, how much of governance problems today relates to the specific problems of large-scale societies. And this is where returning to methods of decision-making in villages and smaller scale societies can be so helpful, because it shows such a contrast between how people think and act and decide and even imagine themselves as individuals in smaller scale societies, and how those of us who grew up in cities in the late 20th century, all of the things that we took for granted, about that money exists, that states exist, that borders exist, and that those things exist as much as mountain ranges or cancer exists, when in fact money and borders and states are all inventions that exist in our minds. And so this is a long way of saying that I think to get to these hard problems of governance, we really have to peel back the layers of abstraction and sometimes of misunderstanding about terms and ideas that go back a long time. Even Seb, using the phrase democracy being in crisis, I would say electoral democracy or parliamentary democracy is certainly in crisis, but democracy itself has never truly been achieved in the way that it could be, in the sense of citizens ruling. So even a basic word like democracy, I think we're far from having a clear-eyed and historically rich view of that term, and it's very, very often abused. So those are some thoughts about the idea of governance and how we use these words. Over to you, Mel.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to address most of the points that were raised, actually. So first, regarding governance, Paul, I'll come to it from a very different angle, actually. I think I really appreciated when I went to the conference in Morocco. I really appreciated that the initiative was framed in terms of governance and not, for instance, in terms of democratic governance, because I think this is a huge shortcoming in participatory and deliberative democracy studies, namely that we translate a lot of the normative underpinnings of what is considered a democracy, and many of those are just procedural kind of ideas about what constitutes a democracy, and also very much connected to electoral representative democracies. And by just translating those normative underpinnings to how we look and how we frame our case studies across the world, we just exclude a lot of experiences that just don't fall into those categories. So thinking in terms of governance, I love the definition that Seba gave, because I thought it was very straightforward and very simple, just people coming together, deciding how to live together. Looking at how communities organize, I think there's a lot we can learn there, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. And there's also a question, of course, of epistemic justice, right? Of really reflecting the diversity of what's actually happening on the ground across the world, and not just focusing on the reality of really very few states, very few nation states in the world. And every year there are fewer according to democracy indices. So thinking in terms of governance, I think, so to make the long story short, I think thinking in terms of governance helps us see the reality on the ground of how communities are organizing, and lets us learn more of that or about that reality. And then I want to connect that to the point that Deborah raised about using the term Global South. So we had a conversation about this. I'm also not super happy with the term Global South, but I don't think there's really a better option. So Global South, or the division between Global South and Global North, is quite established. Let's say the international vocabulary to refer to, Western wealthy nations and the rest of the world, and the many dependencies and the many limitations that come from that effective global economic division and political division. There are other terms that one could use, but I think the main idea is reflected in there. I think when we speak of Global South, it's really not geographic, right? So the indigenous communities in, let's say, the United States or Canada, I would say, are also comprised in the term Global South, because they're also in many ways oppressed by the powers that be in the global north, if we want to put it in those terms. I personally prefer the term majority world and minority world, where the minority world is not what we usually understand them as minorities, but really just the wealthy, very wealthy Western countries that dominate world politics. Those are the minority, and everyone else is really the majority. And so this is again going to the argument of why we need to look elsewhere when we think about governance. And the last point that I want to make, and maybe in doing so answer my own questions, or inviting you to discuss also those questions about databases, about how we produce knowledge, what is the knowledge that we share. I loved Rosa's contribution, because I think one thing that I am really missing from databases of democratic innovations, of participation and deliberation, is that they very often focus on institutional design, right? On variables that explain process, that explain participant selection, that explain outcome, that explain uptake, impact outcomes, and so on and so forth. And very often I feel they miss most of these frameworks of understanding these cases and experiences miss the more substantive characteristics that make these forms of participatory governance stand out in the first place. Again, I think the example of participatory budgeting is the most obvious, right? It started as a project of social justice and redistribution, and by being exported across the world, it really lost this kind of substantive element and just became a process of consultation for urban development. And so how can we also account for elements such as conviviality? I think conviviality is the kind of translation, although I don't know if it translates exactly what you meant with the word in Spanish. But I think, or I would be personally very interested in finding a way of enriching these databases also by capturing this kind of transformative elements in innovative ways of governance that are sometimes lost in translation when converted into just methodologies that can be imported and exported elsewhere. I think I spoke for like super long time. Sorry about that, and I'll give the floor to our audience.
Yeah, please. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Lex. Bate, you want to go ahead? And then we have Deborah.
All right. Thank you so much for the time. I'm sorry I could not attend the conference in person because of visa issues here in Cameroon. I am Bate Tabayangalen from Cameroon. I am program director for the International Governance Institute here in Cameroon, and we have been doing a whole lot in governance. I have scanned through the document, and I want to just find out some feedback. Number one is I have a concern because when you're looking at governance, we are looking at the changing dynamics in the nearest future with the coming of e-governance systems, digital democracy systems, AI systems, which can alter a whole lot on the scope of governance. So my first question is with regards to how does governance vocabulary, this initiative, how does it improve governance in telepathic states or in authoritarian states like where I come from? Cameroon is one of the authoritarian, governments having authoritarian regimes. We have been doing our best to ensure good governance. But then, how do this initiative improve on governance within these particular authoritarian or telepathic systems or telepathic states? And my second question is with regards to, what is the scope of expansion, or are there any plans to expand the scope or to reach the reach of governance vocabulary? Are there some particular, comprehensive plans to increase on the scope of collaborations within governments as regards to this initiative that's in the nearest future? That is, I think, my preoccupation. I want to know the future of this initiative and to see if it could be applied in years to come, or if it will not be, workable because of the coming of different digital systems, open data, especially with regards to authoritarian regimes. I'm more concerned in that area because most often we come up with systems like this, which are more implementable in the Western world or maybe in the global South. But then when it concerns sub-Saharan Africa, where we are having more of the governance issues, we don't see the application, and I'm very concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Bate. Thank you, for the question. I guess we have 10 minutes left, so I will rather maybe pack a couple of questions, have answers, and then we can wrap up. I know I told you, Deborah, that you were going, but I think Chad had the hand raised before, and I just I didn't remember it. Chad, do you want to go ahead, and then we can go with Deborah?
Oh, yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. I hope you're doing very well. My name is Abu Sahita Shahd. I am a Moroccan student. I study economics. And I just wanted to say thank you very much for this opportunity. We got to absolutely discover this world of politics and democracy, etc. It was very unfortunate for me to not attend the last previous event or meeting you guys had in Rabat, I guess, which is my city, but maybe in the future I will attend. So my question is, or my answer to the question that was in the chat was, there's a very big problem. And for example, in my case, in Morocco, there's a lack of communication between citizens or youth or Moroccan youth and governance, because, we really don't have a connection or a relation, because we actually have, or the Moroccan youth have innovative ideas to actually develop a country. And we actually want to be part of that movement, and we really don't know how to contribute in that. So my question is, how can we, the Moroccan youth, actually be a part of the governance movement in politics, etc.? Because we actually have so much potential to actually develop a country, but we really don't know how. So that's my question, and I really hope you guys answer it. Thank you. And another question, I'm sorry. Where will be like the next meeting, and will it be held in Morocco? Because you guys, I think, had it last time, right? In Morocco. So will it be any other event? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you for the question. Yeah, and so we go with Deborah, and then we make a wrap up with the questions.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to refer back to what Mel just said previously about, yes, of course, we understand that there are indigenous languages all over the world, but we'll just use the term Global South as an umbrella term, and people will understand that we include all indigenous languages. I just have to say it's not, it reminded me, I mean, I'm a feminist also, and there was, we went through a phase discussing the use of pronouns, whether the word his or her or him could be used, or he as the subject in writing. And for quite a while it was said, oh, well, just assume that women are included, and to say that we can use the term Global South and, we'll just assume that everybody else is included. It reminded me of that. So I would like to reiterate the fact that the term Global South really isn't inclusive enough. It's too narrow, and it's just not acceptable. And also that the term, this axis, Global North and Global South, as far as languages are concerned, this is also very strange, because it ignores the East-West axis. And there are, for example, in China, in the East, there are a huge number of indigenous languages within China, yeah, and also within India. And yeah, so the East-West axis also cannot be ignored. So Global North and Global South, Global South, it can't stay in the declaration as far as languages are concerned. It really does have to change. You can't, you can't repeat the same argument that men said to women and say, oh, just assume that we're talking about women as well. You can't use the term Global South and say, just assume we're talking about all the other indigenous peoples as well, even if they're in the North. Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make that point a little more forcefully. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Deborah. Thank you for the comments. Yeah, I guess, and we're also inviting you to submit those comments in the Rabat Declaration. In the website, you will have place to put the comments just for the whole text, or if you want to comment a specific sentence or word of the Rabat Declaration, we really encourage you guys to go ahead and put your comments, as this declaration is still on work and we're still gathering inputs. I'll pass it to Evie to maybe answer some of the questions.
Thank you, Seba. Maybe I'll try to answer the question that came from Bat, the first question. So Bat, you asked, how is the initiative planning to improve governance in authoritarian states? First of all, I want to say that I will definitely not have a perfect answer to that question, but I think with the help of others and with your help specifically, we can definitely address these kind of issues within the initiative in the future. And this is something we need to think of. What I can say, and I think you talked about Cameroon, and I being very interested in governance in Africa. I know that many communities are actually have traditional ways of organizing themselves and traditional way of taking collective decisions that are democratic and that are not always and often not recognized as such, and not necessarily mobilized into the state discourse or into even constitutions, not taken in consideration when it comes to finding ways for people to express their views in politics, for instance. And what I can say about that is that these communities often organize themselves despite of the state, and sometimes they have to resist the state. And it's even more problematic, obviously, in authoritarian states. And I think these communities are there, they're organizing themselves every day, they keep organizing themselves. And I think as an initiative, our role would be to shed some light on the practices of these communities and find ways to actually support these communities despite the state being authoritarian. I think there are probably many ways of doing that. One of the ways we are thinking of is through research. As I said, through showing how these communities are actually having practices that are democratic, and that these practices should be recognized and should be protected, and they should have the right to express their views through the mechanisms that they have been using for sometimes centuries. So this is one answer. I guess there are other ways of answering the question. If anyone wants to add something, it'd be great. Otherwise, we can also look at other questions.
Yeah. We also have another one from Bate, from Deborah, from Melisa. But just before that, we also I wanted to answer, to give a little answer for Chad. We're still looking where are we going to meet again, Chad, and talking about like how could Moroccan youth also engage into these governance maybe discussions or debates. I think youth also have like a critical role here on transforming governance, and I'm talking about, like, for example, youth movements or student movements all over Colombia and all over Latin America that I knew. They were transforming really the ways in which the people can take decisions, and in which the people can gather together for decision making. I remember once going to Popayán, that is a city in Colombia, and there was a mechanism of giving the minutes and the kind of making more equitable the participation between men and women. So they put it like I don't know, like 4 seats, and they asked the people that wanted to participate to go and sit and gave their speech there. But they couldn't give a speech more than 3 minutes, I guess. And all of the seats, like the 4 seats, have to be 2 women, 2 men. If there were no 2 women and 2 men, they weren't able to talk and to give their speech. So those are kind of little innovations that I think there's a lot to dig in terms of how youth can engage into these into these discussions, into this perspective, and into this initiative. Also, if you want to join, and this is for all of you, if you want to join to the initiative, I just put the link also of our email. You can write us to our email, or you can go through the Rabat Declaration. You can text directly to us, Paul, Melisa, Evie, Lex, John, me, as you wish. So yeah, just having that thing. Deborah, do you still want to go? Melisa, do you still want to go?
I think the hands were up from before, actually, but no, I mean, I'll just jump quickly in to say that, or basically reinforce what you just said, right? Like, the initiative is open, so everyone is welcome to join and keep collaborating, especially if you are actively interested in the declaration, in helping us create this database of databases, and many of the questions were really very much in line with the concerns that moved us to start the initiative in the first place, right? To really reflecting the diversity of experiences across the world and thinking on how best to do that and how to move forward with that impetus. So just join us. And as to when and where we're meeting, I'm also very curious. Let's find out.
Just to jump in maybe to what just Melisa said, I think it also leads us to the second question of Bat about the scope of the initiative. I don't know if he meant in terms of geographical scope, but that's how I understood it. And the initiative is meant to be global. So the idea is to have as many people, communities, organizations from different countries. There is no restriction when it comes to that. Yeah, I don't know, Sebas, do we have another question that wasn't answered yet?
I don't think. I know that there are some people like Deborah that are having trouble maybe commenting on the declaration. Just please, Deborah, if you can write us directly to the email, and we will fix that definitely. Paul, I want to maybe give the floor to you if there are any closing remarks or something. Thank you so much.
So I think this was incredibly provocative, generative, and this is the beginning, right? This is the beginning of a movement, of a new initiative. So it's just getting off of the ground. We encourage participation, active deliberation, and involvement. There will be other events in the coming months, particularly connected to this, such as the Participedia Winter School this June 10th to 15th, which is taking place at 3 simultaneous locations: Memorial University in Newfoundland, Canada, University of Western Cape, Cape Town, South Africa, and UFMG in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. So please, I encourage you to stay active, to stay engaged, and to stay connected to the different events coming out of this initiative. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to our wonderful speakers. Sebastián, you want to stay around a minute after? It would be a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk soon.